Hello, and welcome to today's European SharePoint Office 365 and Azure Community webinar, the fourth of a series of 6 Azure Week webinars. My name is Laura, and I'm delighted to be joined by Ralf Richter, who will present the topic Azure Static Web Apps in a nutshell.
Okay.
Remember to join in on the conversation about today's webinar and more on Twitter. Our Twitter handle is @EuropeanSP and our hashtag is ESPC23. Don't forget to check out the Resource Centre. This is updated daily with the latest blogs, ebooks, webinars, and how-to videos. Simply visit sharepointeurope.com and click the Content tab at the top. Continue your learning by joining us for our next webinar of Azure Week, Harnessing the Power of Digital Transformation with Azure Cosmos DB, which takes place later on today, Wednesday, July 19th from 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. CEST. For full details, please check out sharepointeurope.com/register for webinars. You can now watch the European Power Platform Conference 2023 showreel video from Dublin last June. Just last month, over 1,200 Power Platform professionals gathered in Dublin for the European Power Platform Conference 2023. Check out our amazing showreel video full of highlights from Dublin last month. Next year, we're taking the European Power Platform Conference to Brussels. Join over 1,500 of your professional peers and expect world-class expert guidance to help you succeed in your projects and careers and an unforgettable experience in the beautiful city of Brussels. You can register your interest for EPPC 24 in Brussels at sharepointeurope.com/European Power Platform Conference. Europe's premier Microsoft 365 and Azure Technologies Conference occurs this November 27th to 30th in Amsterdam, with access to over 100 world-class speakers and over 120 expert sessions. There is endless knowledge to gain at ESPC 23. Microsoft technologies are advancing rapidly, so stay in the know by attending ESPC to hear from the greatest on the very latest. Get your early bird discounted tickets for ESPC 23 in Amsterdam this year and join us and learn to better master Microsoft 365 and Azure at ESPC. Visit sharepointeurope.com to secure your tickets at this discounted price. After the webinar, we will have a questions and answers session. Type any questions you might have into the questions window. Questions will be selected and answered at the end of the presentation. This webinar will be recorded and added to the Resource Centre, where you will be notified by email when it is available. And now I'm going to pass you over to today's webinar presenter, Ralf. Hello, Ralf.
Hello. Welcome to Azure Static Web Apps in a nutshell. And I'm going to show you today what Azure Static Web Apps means to you and how it can be used for you, or can be useful for you in a real world scenario, which I'm leading, which is me leading over to explain you the Azure Static Web Apps a little bit first. But let's start with the agenda. So we're going into Azure Static Web Apps. I'm going to say SWA in further of this meetup, due to the fact that it's much more shorter in general. Then we go over to quotas and pricing, as I'm sure that it is a very interesting point for you to decide whether you're going to use that service or going into an app service. We are also having a glimpse at the edge. And then I'm going to show over a real-world use case, which I've done in the past, while I was going into static web apps. And this is then leading me into a short demo where I can show you within a few minutes on how to deploy and bring up your first static web app live. Within this 15 minutes, you'll learn all that stuff. So I'm Ralf Richter. I'm delighted to be presented with the Azure MVP Award this year again. So it happened, and I'm pretty happy about that. You can reach out to me, seeing all these addresses. You can sign up and hook me on Twitter, and also you can get a follow on LinkedIn, where I'm sharing technical stuff as well. So as a lead developer, I have to explore all these services which are in Azure, especially I'm specialized for Azure services. So I had a look into static web apps, and I found them very, very useful. What are static web apps? So static web apps in general do have a brilliant tool chain for you. And what you're seeing on this picture is not all. So while we have a static web app on the right, where the service itself contains the static content, and on the other hand, the possibility to add an API. And this API can be everything, not only Azure Functions, but the cool thing is you have, for the standard service, the Azure Function built in. So that means you can have your API for your front end implemented within that simple and single service. You do not have to deploy any Azure Static Web Apps. It has limitations, so the functions has some limitations. You cannot use all functions hooks for it. So there is, for instance, no timer available and all that stuff. If you plan to do something like that, you have to use static web Azure function, which you can bring by your own into a static web app. I'll show you a little bit of the static web app service itself later on. And then if we go into the middle, you have those two icons here, which is no longer true. There are plenty of other code repositories supported now. So we have Azure DevOps pipelines, we have GitHub Actions, and you can bring in custom as well. And then it means when you have a code change on the very left of this screen, it will be pushed into your code repository. And when you've deployed your static web app, either by Visual Studio Code, or you've done it in the portal, you'll get for free that action, which will deploy your code right in a minute after the code change pushed onto your Azure Static Web App, which is pretty cool. I'll show you later on how cool is that. So what are the features coming with static web apps? So for sure, we have the idea of bringing out a web app, which is meant to have a web hosting, and you can bring in any static content. So HTML, CSS, JavaScript, you name it. You can bring in and make your page and your web app dynamic by having an API inside. We have that GitHub first tier integration, and now also Azure DevOps. We also have free SSL certificates. You can customize your domain. You have a customizable authorization with it. There's a role concept built into. That means you can authorize your users for your web app and also check which role they are having on your web app to give them the rights to do the stuff you want them to do. It is highly configurable by a settings file. And we have a huge support for development. So you can have a preview mode. So whenever you do a pull request, the code will be pushed on your static web app and will be presented as a preview so that you can have not only the code to review, you also can review the actual behavior of your web app in a deployed mode. So that's a very cool thing. So I'm letting some people in. Sorry. Okay. It is already a real cool thing now. But we go further, which is why is that so cool for me? So we have the built-in Azure functions, but you can also bring your own Azure functions. You can bring on your own APIs hosted by Web App Service. You can go and connect API management, or you have Azure Container Apps, which are going into bringing an API as well to your static web app. So that's really cool. So it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter from where your API is coming, you can bring it into your static web app. Okay, I need some support here for letting people in. That would be nice. Thanks. And cool. So it is really important to have an API in your web app to make it dynamically and executing code, right? So what does that look like? Let's talk about quotas and pricing, because one of the main favorite things for me is you have the possibility to host your static web app for free. So, but let's first show on what are the quotas. And as these digits are changing fast, and I don't want to update my slides all the time, I've figured out on which page it is, and that's the page where you can have your overview about the quotas of those two plans. And as you can see, you see 100 GB per month included bandwidth is really cool, and you get a free plan. So, and you can have 10 of those static web apps for free within your Azure subscription. So so I hope everybody's in now. Thanks for coming. No, it's not. Okay.
Ralf, I can let people into the lobby if you want to keep going.
Cool. Thank you, Laura. So the storage, which is coming with the static web app, seems to be small, but for static content, you don't need any more content, and it doesn't matter whatever you bring up with your API, meaning as content that doesn't count. So it is a cool digit here. I would say that when you have an effective web app, you won't go over that in terms of having really fast loading of your static web app. So you can have three pre-production environments, which is really cool. You can have 2 custom domains, and that's really important because usually it comes up with Lily nice one something URL, which is a funny name but doesn't mean to be a name for your app. So the domain can be changed for sure. Using Azure DNS, that's pretty easy. And so we have also unlimited end users that may authenticate with your app, and also authorization, but that's limited to 25 end users. So I'm going to be honest, the free plan suits to the most of you. And if you're not going to use the roles which are implemented in static web apps and you're using Azure Active Directory instead, you do not have the limits of 25 users for sure. So have that in mind while planning your static web app. The standard plan on the other side offers you for a service tier which is more professional if you have to have a bigger app, a more frequently used app, and then you should go for the standard plan. The free plan is nice for tryouts, for private projects, and also for small internal projects within your company, for instance, where that's not that important that the app is up and running. So, so what are the hosting features comparing both plans, free and standard plan? So as you can see, the first 6 are pretty equal. And then we have the staging environments, which is changing here. And then we have the app size and all that stuff, which is also changing. That's no real surprise that those digits are going a little bit out. But you can also have here custom roles with the function. Oh, okay, that was my mistake. I'm pretty early on these static web apps, and on the early stage, you could assign your Azure Active Directory with a free plan. That's no longer possible. I have to correct that one. So you have to have the standard plan to connect your Azure Active Directory there. And you can then have custom roles, which is done by groups, for instance. And private endpoint is also supported. And then when you have to have a service level agreement due to the fact that you want to have your web app running always up and servicing, so go for a standard, for an SLA for sure. So what are the pricings? The free tier that doesn't cost anything. You have to have an Azure subscription, and that one's for free as well. You can have over 25 services for free in your Azure Static in your Azure subscription. So please try it out. And if you have an Azure subscription, you also can go for the standard one, which is $9 per app per month, which is not really a huge amount of money, and gives you but the static web app gives you a lot of fast and quick developing of applications and hosting them. Going back to the slides. So as we had our pricing, you have to have in mind that static web apps can easily be all over the world provided. That means that the traffic for your customer can be on the shortest path possible to him. So we're going to cut down the latency of the network as much as we can by having it globally. And also, this is brought by, and you can bring that much more to a next level by going to Edge for Enterprise. And what does that mean? So if you're going to use Azure Static Web Apps Enterprise grade, you go for having it on Edge, and that brings your global presence in over 118 plus Edge locations across 100 major cities, which cuts down any latency to your user and makes it awesome fast being available for your user. And I won't go all over these features here, but I mean that your Azure service should be protected for sure, like having a DDoS protection and that stuff should be no question at all. So a real world use case on how can that look like? I'm running a conference as well as the people having me here. Thanks, Laura, for having me here on your conference, which is awesome. Thanks for that. I'm having a conference as well. I'm a developer, so my conference is focused on Azure development, and I had to have a new web page providing the information to any interested people. So I wanted to go for static content for efficiency, because if you have static content, it's amazingly fast in loading. And this brings me to the next point, sustainability. Why is a static web app sustainable? I explain that a little later. I want to have it modern, so having CI/CD with it, bring understanding or supporting the modern code like React or Blazor or GoHugo or whatever you want to have under it, Gatsby, for instance. And I want it increased by performance, very responsive, and I want to have a registration on page. So what is in? We used Azure Static Web App, Azure DNS Zone, like I told you a little earlier. Azure Static DNS or Azure DNS will enable you to really fast change the domain of your static web app. App Insights for monitoring and Azure App Maps or Azure Maps to bring up a map within that service. So what we're also having is the GitHub and GitHub Actions, and we use GoHugo, which is a static content generator based upon Markdown files. And the IDE we used is Visual Studio Code, and for sure some extensions like Azure Static Web App CLI and Azure Functions Core Tools. Those two are pretty important because Azure Static Web App and Visual Studio Code are supporting you to develop your static web app locally, and you can test almost all feature locally. By having the Static Web App CLI, you're even they are even supporting you to check out if your authorization and authentication is working fine. So check that out when you're going into it. There are plenty of Learn modules on Microsoft. Maybe I have time to go into that a little later. So the architecture of our web app is like so. We have the GitHub code repository, we have our action, we have on the right hand our Azure, and therein lives our Azure Static Web App, which is really a web app. And then we have these DNS zone and for sure Azure Key Vault to keep our secrets hidden and all that stuff, and application insights for our monitoring stuff. So this is what it looks like, and for sure we can have a small look on how it looks like in the real world. So this is the page loading pretty fast. Nothing special on it, but it is a pretty fast page, and you can see, so as it is also in US, so that was our 2021 or 22 conference. This year it will happen somehow other infos are coming up later. I have also the registration button here and everything's fine. So how can you do your own static web app with Azure? So first of all, you click Add or Create a Resource, and then you go for Static Web Apps, and it will look for all the services. And then you'll have that static web app, and we go for this one, and we want to create one, and I'm going for the standard plan. So we give it a name. Let's see, that's working fine. So we go for standard, and we go to West Europe. And also we're going to have GitHub, and I've connected already my GitHub account to it, which is no surprise for you, I hope. So it is no asking me for my organization, which repository I would love to have to. So it's the 15 minutes static web apps, and I'm going for the branch main. Now it's asking me for build details. Well, why is that? So and let's head over to how a structure is in a static web app. So with a static web app, you usually have a distribution folder, and you have your app folder, and you have your API folder. So this example is a Blazor application, and I have here my API code, and I have here my client code, and the shared one is going used by both of them. To ensure that the static web app is using my code correctly, I'm going to tell the deployment here, I'm going to use a Blazor application, and it puts automatically the folder correctly in. So the output location will be www root. The API location will be API, so /API, as you've seen here. So I'm going to use that one as my API location, which is this here. And we're going to use the app location as it named client. So that's the one here. So what will happen now is we can go now for tags. I'm not using tags at all for my demo subscription. So let's go over to whatever comes out here. In the summarization, we see all that stuff, and then we go and click create. So now it will deploy our application, and we see in a minute or less. So we go to resource, which is now cool is you can now go to this URL, or for you easier, it is go to browse, and then you see your static web app is here waiting for content. Now, as we are already on our GitHub repository for this one, we go to actions, and we then have a look on what's happening here. And you see there, oh, wow, there is an action already running. Why is that? With the deployment or provisioning of that service, by connecting our GitHub Azure portal, or the Azure service is providing us and deploying us an action as well. And this action is now being executed, triggered by the Azure portal or by the Azure service. And after this is executed, it will also deploy our service automatically towards our static web app, which is happening at the moment. So let's see. Oh, successfully isolated. Whoa, that looks good. So that means our API is also there. What will this app do for us? Let's go back to our code. So our API is really a simple one. We have a small simulator for weather informations, and we have a client which is going to show our weather informations. And as you can see, it is named fetch data. It will have a table inside and will load the information from our weather forecast API service. Yeah. Okay, that's it. What's happening here? And if we go back to our actions, it's still working. So that's the pity with Blazor. It has to be translated into HTML and JavaScript. Yeah, which will take a little while. 2 minutes, okay, maybe 1 minute more, but then our static web app here will change. But time enough to have a look at the service itself. So we have all these standard things over here. We have a configuration page here, so where we can have our app settings, which is pretty common to you, I guess. And you can select your app settings and which environment you want to have to. So you can configure more than one environment, as explained before. You can have that automatically generated ones with a pull request, or you can have your own environment set up by yourself and also password protected, so nobody else except you can join that static web app. You have app insights, the possibility to add app insights on a single click. If you go for yes, it'll also offer you the possibility to deploy the app service later on. You can also have your custom domains here. So our current domain is, what is it? Column 3 something. So that's not the being meant to be a real domain. So you can change that here. And if you go for add, you can create a custom domain on Azure DNS, which is the fastest way to get a domain here. You can add your own APIs. That's not now showing anything due to the fact that our action is, oh, there's a hook that's green. Okay, let's hit over. Quick check. Were we successful? Yes, we were successful. Look at this. The page is there. It's loading pretty fast. We have our counter here and fetching data. Yes, our function is also working. That means the API is working as well. And we do not have any hassle with our code. So that's the thing I wanted to show quickly. Let's head over to our service. You can have now in preview database connections. So that means you can have a connector and to ask the connector directly within your code to bring up some data. These are the environments where you can configure your environments, the preview environments and the production environment. This is the role management, which I find out, or which on my opinion is a little pity, because you have to click invite and then you have to add the email address from where it is and so on. You have to name a role, and if you do a typo within contributor, for instance, and you leave out the O at the end, so that it still reads like contributor, but it doesn't have the matching. So that can be a pity for your that only that you know it. So identity, you can have a system assigned identity as well, and the user assigned identity as well. So that's important if you're going to use Active Directory for your use. Then you can enable enterprise grade. You can also change the hosting plan for sure. And you have here the private endpoints as we are. Oh, that's not so fine. It's my fault due to the fact that I do not have the resource provider within my Azure subscription yet loaded. So that needs to be done first, and then you can have your private endpoints. Yeah, and then we have all the other stuff, tasks, exploit, logs, and everything else. No real surprise that this stuff is there. We're going back to our overview, and now we can see that our requests and data and all that stuff is available for us at a glimpse on the start page of our service. So that's Azure Static Web Apps, really quick. Not having too much blah blah. What we can do now is I'm going to show you some code change. Let's go to the client.
Ralf,
yeah.
Sorry, we might just have to wrap it up.
Okay.
We seem to have just gone a few minutes over, and we just have one or two questions in here, if that's okay.
Oh yeah, that's for sure. That's okay. While we're having some questions, wrapping it up. So Azure Static Web Apps are a service which enables you to quickly provide a web app to your users. It supports you in the best way ever. You have a complete toolchain automatically deployed for you, which includes CI/CD. It can be done all over the world by having an edge service inside. It is, for my opinion, a pretty cheap service, and it does exactly what you want to have, and providing you the ability to have a web app quick and fast up and running, and also supports you in bringing in your own data by having this side-by-side API or bringing your own API, whatever you want to have. And if there are any questions, please head over and let's go into the questions, Laura.
Thanks, Ralph, for a great presentation and a great demo. So we'll get into the questions and answers part now. So again, should you wish to ask a question, please feel free to type it into the questions box now. So the first question I see here is someone wants to know, what are the main advantages of using Azure Static Web Apps compared to other hosting options?
Yeah, well, for sure, you have the possibility to use Azure Container Apps. You have the possibility to use any other service which brings up apps for sure. Regarding costs and simplicity, Static Web Apps is unbeatable by them. So having the API and the static code together in one service, and you do not have to have dealing with the chain of like CI/CD and all that stuff, or being supported by having preview environments and all that stuff, you can go for Static Web App. This is the major difference between all these services, and it's pretty cheap. It has its limitations, as I've shown you before. If you go for it may be that when you go for enterprise scale app, which is not enterprise edge. So please ignore that edge for the moment. If you go for enterprise scale app, which has millions or tons of users, you may want to go for an app service or for container services due to the fact that the utilization can be exceeded for the Static Web App. By a normally used service, you should be good with the Static Web App. Try it out and find it out by yourself. It is cheap, easy to learn, and gives you a quick access to your results, so that it is really quick to find out. Do a proof of concept and compare it. If you know that you're having a ton of user, please step away from Static Web Apps. Next
Brilliant.
question.
Thanks, Ralph. So the next question here is someone wants to know, are there any specific security measures or best practices recommended when deploying a static web app on Azure?
For sure. So general speaking, keep away having any password within your code. That's for sure. But GitHub supports you. Azure DevOps now supports you too, to avoid any harmful code within your application. Use Key Vault or a similar service to store your secrets or passphrases or whatever secrets you have. And then link it to your app settings so that only the application is capable to read those secrets and use that secrets for the service, and that's it. I do not have any more recommendations, as please follow the common guide of security and safety by deploying and developing your application. So it will go much too deep into that if we explain that here.
Brilliant. Thanks, Ralph. So there's just one more question here, and someone is wondering, is it for a small group of audience, not for bulk users? They're wondering.
Well, no, it is when you go for the free plan, it is more or less for a small group of users. If you go for a standard plan, I mean, I have thousands of calls of my page during the conferences. There is no limitation, and there was no issue at all. So if the functionality is just bringing up some content, no hassle. If the functionality is more dynamically and you have to load and get data and compare authorization, authorizations and all that stuff, that may be a problem when the user count is going to be a ton of users. So I've never tested it, but it may be, and I'm talking about real big use cases like Google Maps or something. Like you can imagine the digits of users using Google Maps or Bing or something like that. So when we come to that size, we will use another service. Okay, so I've made a quick change to our app. Still showing hello world. Okay, it's my mistake. Yeah, I was on the index page. Yeah, but that's it. I was doing the wrong change. Yeah.
Brilliant.
Does that answer all the questions? I hope.
There's just one question left, and we'll have to make it really quick just because
Yep.
we've gone a good bit over time. So, last question is the difference between single page app and static apps.
So you can run a single page app with static web apps. So if that's the question, you can use React, Angular, whatever you want to, and run it with static web apps. There's no difference. So running or executing JavaScript will happen in the browser. It is not server interpreted, and then you have the possibility to run your React or Angular or whatever Gatsby to have your static to have your SPA running with static web app.
Brilliant. So that concludes the question and answer session. So just on behalf of the ESPC community, Ralf, we want to extend a big thank you to you again for taking the time to carry out this webinar today. We really do appreciate it. So that is the end of today's webinar. You can find this webinar and more at sharepointeurope.com/resource center. That is it for today, folks. Thanks again to everyone for joining us today. Take care, and we hope that you'll join us again for more learning. Bye for now.
Thanks for having me. Take care and have a great day.